Sponsor an orphan, and you'll help support a vulnerable child to have the education they've always dreamed of, so they can build a brighter future. You'll be feeding a hungry stomach and a hungry mind with knowledge that will last them a lifetime. That's the power of an education. Sponsor an orphan now with Islamic Relief.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everybody. I'm Preacher Miles, host of the SOS Shout Out Show, shooting from Mary's upstairs studio here in Washington, D.C. Listen, our topic today was the mental illness of gun control. Let me be very, very clear in saying that this was the original topic that I actually been working on since last week. We just had a chain of events with a shooting in Uvalde, Texas, outside of Austin, Texas, about 84 miles. 14 children were murdered, and a teacher was murdered, and we have some injuries. Updates are coming, but I'm going to ask right at the top of the show that we send out du'as and prayers for the victims, and also du'as and prayers for the survivors of the victims. This is something that is abnormal, brothers and sisters. This is endemic. We have a problem with gun control, and it is endemic in the context of how it affects people. Even more so because it's politicized. And when I say politicized, it means that people look for strategic advantage to be on the side of an argument for gun control, and a lot of times also against gun control. We're not looking at the overall picture. Let me take you back to 1974. For some of you who weren't born, it's okay. I'm going to fill in the blanks. One of the first memorable incidents of issues of gun control for me was 1974. So I'm saying I'm about 8 years old. You don't know the name. The name was Marcus Wayne ShOUT. Marcus Wayne ShOUT. Marcus Wayne ShOUT was a follower of, at the time, the Black Hebrew Israelites. That's cool. Do your thing. At the time, the Black Hebrew Israelites advocated against Black people having civil rights, and most Black leaders, okay, it happens. What he's famous for, and what many of you won't know because in history books erases this thing away, is that he went down to Atlanta, Georgia, and he walked into a church with the intentions to kill Martin Luther King Sr. But he didn't do that. He killed his mother, Alberta King, and also a deacon, Deacon Boykins, I'm sorry. He killed the two of them. When he was asked why he killed her, he said because she was near. At that time, it was seen as something of an aberration. And I'm also going to add that because this was looked upon as a black-on-black crime, that it didn't really garner the attention other than this was Martin Luther King's mother that we were talking about, Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother that we were speaking on. And here we are in this age looking at the demographic of young killers. You can talk to the young man up in Kenosha, the man in Buffalo, and this young guy right here who was a high school student who moved to decimate the lives of young children and educators. If you start doing the math, brothers and sisters, and we look at the environment, we are in a gun environment. People are allowed to carry guns on their hip, open carry, concealed carry, weapon licenses, all these type of things. And what I know is when people get guns, personalities change. People are hyper aggressive because when you have a gun, the inclination for a lot of people is, I want to use it, or I'm looking for an opportunity to use this gun. I'm not saying that everybody is like that. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, though, is I understand the emotion. And on the other side of the emotion is that you have people that are in some regards stymied in their own emotional and psychological development, whereby the gun gives them an equalizing factor to deal with the rest of society, or even more so to deal with their deficits in their own personal lives. You can't tell me or give me a reason fathomable that a person would go in and kill 14 elementary children and a teacher. But you're about to listen and find out how people would defend the gun that did this job, as opposed to examining the person who had the gun that perpetrated this action. This is a shout out show. Let's go ahead and get it started. We're talking about mental illness of gun control. It's Preacher Moss. Let's roll. So again, at the top of the show, we want to send out prayers and just well wishes to the community of Uvalde, the souls of 14 young children, the teacher, the educator, the people who are injured. We ask that Allah give them strength and give them a just reward, not just in this life, but also in the paradise. Forgive their bad sins, accept their good deeds, and give them the highest levels of paradise. But this is madness. This is legitimate madness. You see, I'm 55 years old, and I remember the arguments that we used to have about people of color having access to guns. That somehow we were so animalistic and lizard brain that we could not control ourselves. It was also the argument that they gave for us having our own schools and us having our own businesses and us just being free in America, just experiencing freedom, that somehow we didn't have the high capacity to deal with the troubles and the trauma, which was brought on by American society, that was legalized by American society, that somehow we couldn't get through it because they couldn't understand how we got through it. And here we are today at the top of a show, getting ready to talk about the mental illness of gun control. The mental illness is the arguments that are circulating around gun control, which allows people to propagate that somehow, someplace, while everybody has access to a gun, somehow when these things happen in Buffalo, and these things happen in Uvalde, and these things happen in Sandy Hook, that somehow the gun is not responsible. If you historically look at this thing, I look at the Second Reconstruction and the idea of slaves being able to be free, brothers and sisters, was contingent upon the ability of white society to take guns out of the hands of free slaves, to remove firearms, to make it extremely difficult for them to defend themselves. And this is the same thing that we're having right now. We have people who are profiting by this death, profiting by these children being removed from the face of the earth, not being able to fulfill their potential, their God-given potential, not being able to even have rights in the argument in a scenario where they want to protect themselves. We can't do that. You can't continue to do that. And all of the politicians, I say all of the politicians, who cannot come together on a cohesive moral argument on the fact that people just have a right to live. That people have a right to live. That you can have your own point of view. Listen to me. You can have your own point of view. But the fact of the matter is, the idea that you enforce your point of view through violence is unacceptable. And over, we begin to revisit these things. I give you an opportunity to go do your homework. 1974, Martin Luther King's mother was at an organ on Sunday, and a black man, walked in and shot her in the head behind her with a handgun. And the only reason he wasn't sentenced to death is because the King family did not believe in the death penalty. He dies at 44. But my point is, even this misguided soul, this very, very misguided soul, understood that in his strategy, he was flawed. He knew he was going to get caught. He knew he was wrong. The problem now is people are doing the same thing without any compunction about what's right and what's wrong, understanding the reality of other people's rights. And this is something in Buffalo, they're not talking about it, but this is something, brothers and sisters, when you talk about the overall effort of the GOP and the Trumpers to go out here and exact a concept of otherness on other people, otherness on people who don't look like them, and otherness on people who disagree with their points. And so it becomes the fact that a person lifts up a gun because in their mind, they've never had a conversation with logic. They've never had an understanding that people have equal access to life before guns, to property before guns, to joy, happiness, and freedom before guns. Let me introduce everybody. First of all, I want to give a shout out. Our dear sister, Ree, is on the way to Oklahoma City. That's good. She's going to hang out with hubby Derek. That's good. Sister Ree, she told me she was being on the show. She wanted to send her salams and well wishes to everybody. Also, our dear beloved brother, the Salahuddin family, Sister Sonia and Brother Bilal, they are on a cruise, so they are in the Bahamas, so they don't have good Wi-Fi, so they're not going to make it today. But let me introduce everybody. We got Mary Moss. She said, hello, SOS family. Happy to see my son, Preacher Moss. Happy to see you too, Mom. Hope all is well. Mom made some vittles today, so I can't wait to break fast. All right. Also, we can give a shout out to Altaf Rashid, our main man, 6 o'clock, straight up, straight down. Our dear brother, man, our Canadian ambassador to the show, man. Thank you so much for making it to the platform. Also, we have Brother Johnny Thomas. Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good to see you, brother. And I enjoyed, I know I digress, but I really enjoyed seeing the videos. Brother Jordan playing the violin. My nephew plays classical violin, and he is amazing. That kid is going places. I mean, when I say going places, because if you can play classical violin, people understand the complexity with playing the violin and understanding and being able to mesh with other instruments in an orchestra, not a band, but an orchestra is amazing. So shout out to Brother Jordan and also Brother Justin. Okay. Brother Eric, wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, beloved. Good to see you. Yes, sir. Yes, I'm glad you got your iftar gift. I hope you ate well, my brother. I hope you ate well. And I apologize for being a little late, but we had good intentions here on the Shout Out Show. And as soon as I got it, I sent it to you, man. So peace and blessings to you and yours. So let's talk about our topic today. Oh, before I do that, we want to welcome back Sister Satana Whitfield on her Tuesday, Thursday duty. Our dear sister has joined us. You missed all of the love that everybody had for you with, talking about your Arabic. You have a lot of people. And shout out to Sister Janice Tuft, who's returned. She's recovering from hip replacement surgery, having some complications. But Sister Tuft, we shouted you out on the show yesterday. We're going to shout you out today. We pray that Allah give you shifa. Feel better out there in Seattle and out in the Great Pacific Northwest. Okay. I think I got everybody covered here. Let me throw this out. That the problem isn't the guns. The problem is not the guns. The problem is the philosophical understanding underpinnings that allow people to have guns. What do you need a gun for? That's the one thing we ask. What do you need a gun for? People say I need a gun for protection. Okay. What is protection? What kind of protection are we starting about? So let me throw this out here. People say they need protection. I'm like, okay, but tell me what kind of protection. Like we talk about, there's this whole thing about, I call it the black scourge coming to the suburbs, and I say, well, if you start that as a marketing tool, as a concept, then what you're doing is creating a platform for saying anybody who doesn't look like me, anybody who's not in my neighborhood, anybody that doesn't share my values, whatever those values are enemies. We don't talk about how people and how politicians and how communities villainize other people's existences. This is one. Then number two, and we've said this several times here on the show, in the comment section, we've talked about it. It's the idea that coming out of COVID, there was a real concern about people's overall mental health. That people found themselves outside of their own thinking without any kind of help. And they had almost a cultish relationship with the Proud Boys and the Trumpers and Stop the Steal and things like that are negative ephemerals for any kind of relationship that you're going to have with reality. What do I mean by that? If I demonize voting, I'm going to find people who are going to feel like at some point in time, voting took something from them. If I demonize your education, what you believe, how you educate yourself, you're going to get the same result. If I demonize your religion, I'm going to somehow, in a group, not a mass understanding, but in a group, produce, for lack of a better word, produce an ideology that somehow your religion is broken. And not that it's just broken, but history shows that it's not broken, but it needs to be fixed. That we find these deficits in all these things we do. But guns are different. Guns are a culture. Just like race culture, guns are a culture. And the whole existence of gun culture is, I have a right to bear arms. Nobody says I have a right to bear arms. Nobody ever said you don't have a right to bear arms. What the problem is you can't have a right to bear arms, and it affects my existence, my ability to live freely. It affects my ability to inhale and exhale. Let me tell you guys something. Every day, all of us, we wake up with the reality that, this could be our last day. We could die, right? We wake up with the reality that we could die. But very few of us wake up with the reality, I could be killed by someone. When you're driving in your car, you realize that there's a risk. You have a car accident, you could be killed. But the idea of being killed by someone, the intimacy of this dastardly act is scary. And we see it now all over. We're having mass shootings all over, brothers and sisters. We're talking about COVID, and we're looking at mass shootings. What do you think the Ukraine-Russian conflict is? Constantly bombarded. I get it on my phone. Constantly bombarded about the activities of Ukraine and Russia, visiting acts of chaos and cruelty amongst one another. We are surrounded and inundated with this whole stuff. But it doesn't stop there. Even the media has a part to play. I'm going to show a clip. Tom, let's go ahead and bring it up. I'm going to show a clip that that speaks to two things. Number one is that the conversation that they're having is a conversation that they've been having. And this conversation is literally, what came first, the chicken or the egg or the chicken or the egg, whereby protection is something, and it's growing even more, brothers and sisters, that it becomes the ability that now we have arguments about being preemptive about our protection. We are we have the right, stand your ground, things like that. We have a right now to be preemptive, except if you're a person of color. Okay, let's go ahead and bring it up.
So as has happened before in the aftermath of gruesome mass shootings, once again this week, two principal and competing narratives have emerged as people try to grasp how such things can happen and what might be done to prevent them. As Amna Nawaz reports, some point to guns, their large numbers, and easy access in this country. Others, often voices on the right, including President Trump yesterday, urge a greater focus on mental health treatment, saying that could identify potential shooters before they act.
Judy, guns kill an average of 100 people each day in this country, about 36,000 a year total. For a look at the role guns play in our lives and in the violence we live with, I'm joined by Dr. Garen Wintemute. He's an emergency medicine physician at University of California, Davis Medical Center, where he's the director of the Violence Prevention Research Program. His research for decades has focused on injuries and the prevention of firearm violence. Dr. Wintemute, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you for making the time. I want to ask you about the laws because you have looked extensively at them. In the wake of these mass shootings, people want congressional action. They want legislation. What is being done on the federal or state level to improve gun safety and reduce gun violence?
I think one promising strategy is the Extreme Risk Protection Order, or as we call it here, a gun violence restraining order. It has a number of virtues. It is effective. It is very tightly focused on people who exhibit high-risk behavior such that there is a threat in the near future. It's temporary. It is designed to lessen risk at a time of crisis. We are today in the wake of a series of mass shootings, and it's important to point out that ERPOs, as we call them, while they were thought to be primarily useful for prevention of suicide, were generally enacted at the state level following mass shootings and have been and are being used in efforts to prevent mass shootings.
And I want to be clear about these. These are the same as the so-called red flag laws people have heard so much about recently?
It is the same. Those of us who work in the field don't like the term red flag laws, so we use a term that actually describes what it is we're talking about.
Can I ask why you don't like it? What's inaccurate about it?
Sure. So first off, it's, as we say, very non-specific. Red flag about what? Bugs in the basement? It's also, I think this concerns me the most. It is a term that inspires fear. And we don't want to make people afraid. We want them to feel empowered. So we use terms that describe what the intervention is and convey a sense that this is something that people can do, which is precisely the point.
So there's two additional bills that have had some kind of bipartisan support behind them. One is expanding background checks to include every gun sale or transfer. And the other is concealed carry related, that states who have and allow concealed carry would recognize permits from other states. Would either of those contribute to reducing gun violence in America?
Let me take expanded background checks first. There is very good evidence from our work and others that denying the purchase, denying access to firearms by people who are prohibited from having that access substantially reduces their risk of violence in the near future. We and others have identified a series of concrete flaws in the way background check policies are written and implemented that I think need to be fixed in order for them to have their maximum effectiveness. I will give you one example. There are at least 9 of these. Prohibiting events very often are not reported, even when they are required to be reported. Mass shootings in Sutherland Springs, Texas, in Charlottesville, South Carolina, at Virginia Tech, all occurred because shooters who were prohibited persons were able to pass background checks and acquire their firearms because the prohibiting events were not in the data the background checks were run on. Now, reciprocity, let me just use recent events. Both Texas and Ohio, where we have had mass shootings just in the past few days, are places with concealed carry, at least one with open carry, where it's hard for me to imagine that among the people wisely running away from that shooting scene were a substantial number of people who were themselves armed. We have this collective adolescent fantasy, if I may, that an armed civilian is going to step up and prevent these events. The data show that that almost never happens. And the reason I said that it might be counterproductive is this. States vary widely in their criteria for issuing CCW permits. Some states set the bar quite high, others set it quite low.
Do about nothing. I'm going to tell you guys, back in the day when there was a concern about particularly African Americans have access to guns, it was because we were animals, that we could not make a good decision out of the opportunities that were around us. And in that frustration, we found it incumbent that we would kill each other. Even in that space, this is not a case of lizard brains. This is a case of people who are targeting other people. Let me throw this out. The one thing I can say about the 80s and the 90s and the shootings, when people shot folks, they were trying to kill the people they were trying to kill. We had an issue of innocent bystanders, but they were trying to kill the people they were trying to kill. And the guns allowed them to do that. The guns allowed them to express themselves, however negatively it is. It allowed them to express it. It gave courage to people who could not sit down and agree to disagree. In this scenario of mass shootings, we have people who are shooting folks that they do not know. Buffalo, a person traveled 3 hours to shoot somebody. This young man down in Uvalde, Texas, 18 years old, he's a high school student. He was in high school, brothers and sisters. And let me throw this out here. I am not a mental health therapist or practitioner or anything like that. But people have guns when they're in their right state of mind. Guess what? Life changes. People go through depression, things like that. We're not necessarily safe, even though we're talking about people who are mentally ill having access to guns. Guess what? There are people in the process who become mentally ill. And that becomes a provocation of this person was all right on Thursday, but a month later, this man is ready to clear out a whole Walmart. And in that space, what am I saying? We're not safe. The guns are problematic. If you go around to other developed countries, they don't have access to guns like that. They don't have a proliferation of guns flooding the streets. UK, Sweden, Norway, all these places, Finland, they don't have these guns. The Netherlands, they don't have these guns. The police have the guns because the police are taxed with the fact that they're supposed to protect us. But here, everyone needs protection. And now I see the psychosis. I need protection because there's another person over going, I need protection. And another person goes, well, those who have guns, I need protection. And so you produce this false narrative. But nobody asks for proof. And the people going, I need this gun for protection. They wind up shooting people who don't have guns and didn't have protection. Yeah. And let's call it real. The police force advocates this play as well, for lack of a better word, that they have to be armed to the teeth to deal with folks who are removed from the process of being able to have guns. You can't have a gun if you're a felon. You can't have a gun if you're a certain age. So it's like, where are all of these guns coming from? And why are we continually perpetuating that narrative? That is the Shout Out Show today, brothers and sisters. So what I like to do is just give a thanks to our sponsors. I want to give a shout out to Islamic Relief, USA.org. We want to give a shout out to, of course, Be Financially Independent. I've been here in a minute. So I also want to give a shout out to, before we do that, we want to give a shout out to BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. Again, that's BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. You can call 202-508-3780. Again, that's 202-508-3780. And big shout out to my man, with encourage my man, Umar Hakeem. Shout out to you, brother. And, I just like to leave it on this over note. I really didn't feel great about doing this topic. I thought it was going to be something. And it does come from the fact that I'm a former educator and I taught kids. Two things the kids look for when you're a teacher is, number one, understanding their fear. Number two, protecting them. And in this case today, both of those are violated. That's the SOS today, brothers and sisters. Pray for those. Hey, what's going on? Assalamu alaikum, Brother Reed. Sister Reed, we talked about your piece of you and Derek and Jawan. Thank you so much. All the way from Oklahoma City, found a Wi-Fi connection. God bless you. So we're just going to leave out today, and we'll pick up the topic. Hopefully be a little bit more sunshine on the Shout Out Show. But, you got to report what you see. Take care, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and love.